What could be better than hot tea and a wonderful Vatrushka? It's truly delicious, believe me. This is the simplest and most delicious New Year's and Christmas dessert. Friends, we have a sharply continental climate here, and when winter comes, it's truly a harsh winter. And at such times, you can't do without a delicious, filling, and most importantly, very simple recipe. And today, we're making the simplest and most popular dessert of the Soviet Union called Royal Vatrushka. My grandmother used to make this pie. It's the most affordable and delicious Christmas pie. Hello friends, my name is Julie and you're watching Soviet Born, a channel where we tell you all the truth about the Soviet Union that no one else will tell you. So stay with us, it's going to be very interesting. I've just come from a bakery. Almost every bakery here sells these classic Vatrushkas with cottage cheese, a type of fresh cheese curd. I'll show it to you now. It's very cold here and my hands are freezing. This dessert is sold in any store, in any bakery, and it mainly consists of yeast dough and cottage cheese. Sometimes fruit butter is added as a filling. The history of this pastry goes back to ancient Russia, when Vatrushka was made for holidays, treats, and matchmaking. Over time, housewives decided to improve it, make it more refined. And somewhere in the mid-20th century, the yeast dough was replaced with short crust pastry. But the main ingredients remained the same. And from a simple Vatrushka, we got the Royal Vatrushka, which I'll show you today. To make Vatrushka, we'll first prepare the filling. For this, we have half a kilogram of cottage cheese, 4 eggs, vanillin or vanilla, and sugar. Add sugar to your taste. I have about 250 grams here. For our dish today, I specially went to the farmer's market and bought farm fresh eggs, homemade cottage cheese, and farm fresh butter. Vanilla is also optional. You can add it if you like, or skip it if you prefer. It's not really necessary. To mix the cottage cheese, eggs and sugar, it's best to use an immersion blender. It's convenient and quick, and your cottage cheese mixture will turn out more airy. But unfortunately, my blender broke. So today, I'll be using my old food processor. I put the cottage cheese in the processor bowl, add the eggs, sugar, and vanilla. And we mix it all thoroughly. This is the texture we get. If I were using an immersion blender, there wouldn't be these small lumps. But actually, I really like when cottage cheese is slightly lumpy, though if you prefer a smoother consistency, then an immersion blender is your friend. Take a bowl, add 3 cups of flour, also add a cup of sugar and baking powder or baking soda, whatever you have. Mix it all together. Take 200 grams of butter and a grater. This is the easiest way to make short crust pastry. Take the butter, in my case farm butter, and to prevent it from sticking to the grater, do this. And grate our butter. The butter should be straight from the refrigerator, and it grates very easily. Periodically dip it like this and grate, dip and grate. This is quite an easy method. Actually, Vatrushka comes together very quickly. If I weren't making this for you and on camera, I would probably have it in the oven by now. That's how quickly it comes together. All ingredients are natural, so this treat can even be given to small children, because there's nothing artificial here. No food coloring, no additives. All right, done. Clean this too. Done. And there are no remnants on this grater. We just cleaned it. Maybe my lighting isn't the best. Please excuse me. I'm not a professional cook, and this isn't a professional cooking show. Everything is made home style. Now everything is ready. And we quickly mix it all together like this. I can't even remember how many years I've been making this pie, but it's been very, very, very long. This is the simplest and most delicious New Year's dessert. Our dough is ready. Let's take a baking pan. Now comes the most interesting part, or the easiest part. We're assembling the pie. For this, we need a baking form. Let's grease it slightly with butter. Any type of baking pan will work for this dessert. Silicone, round metal, spring form. Right now, I'm using a glass baking dish. Everything depends on how tall you want your pie to be. If you want to make it taller, and don't worry, it will bake through, then take a smaller pan. If you want it thinner, then take a pan about the size of mine. Now we take roughly half of our dough mixture and eyeball it into the pan here. We leave about 1/3 aside. Spread all the rest like this across the entire form. Here you need to spread it better with your hand, with love, like this, evenly, and make small edges. Now we take our filling and pour all of it in. Spread it evenly across our entire form. And now we simply sprinkle all the remaining so-called dough on top. It's all very easy to do, very quick, that's all. Put it in a preheated hot oven. Bake at 170 to 180 degrees for approximately 40 to 50 minutes. Judge by appearance. If it has turned an even golden color, then your Vatrushka is ready. Okay? This is how our pie turned out. It needs to cool down. After it cools, we'll cut it and taste it. As for the appearance, I like my Vatrushka to be slightly golden brown. You can make yours lighter. You don't have to brown it this much and can keep it more golden. But for some reason, I prefer it to be this toasty. And this is how ours turned out. On one plate, we have Mama Vatrushka and her daughter, the Royal Vatrushka. Friends, I have one big request for you. The thing is, we really love our channel and want to upload videos more frequently. We have lots of exclusive material that you won't read about anywhere else and that no one else will tell you about. But in order for us to truly work at full capacity, we really need your support. Please, go to the description and there will be a link to our Patreon. You can go and take a look. There are various tiers available, and if you have the means, we would be grateful if you could support us because we really need this. And of course, I want to say a big thank you to those subscribers who are already supporting us. We will truly try to keep our channel even more interesting for you going forward. I was about 11 to 12 years old when my dad and I went to visit my babushka, his mother. We rarely visited her about once a year. She lived very far from our city, about 4 to 5 hours away, by intercity bus. Dad worked a lot, and we didn't have the opportunity to go there more often. Babushka lived in a very large sovkhoz. It's called sovkhoz. In Soviet terms, it's a Soviet state agricultural enterprise. She lived with Dad's older brother, and I loved these trips because I finally had the chance to spend more time talking with my father. My grandmother was simply wonderful. Such a small, fair-skinned, thin woman with such small, delicate hands. I loved her very much. And when we were riding on the bus, I said to Dad, I love Babushka so much, but I don't really love Uncle that much. And Uncle, his older brother specifically, was a very strict, stern man. And to tell the truth, I was a bit afraid of him, although he never did anything wrong to me, of course. And Dad says to me, you know, we were just passing through fields, the harvest was beginning, wheat fields, and combines were working in the distance. And Dad says, you see these fields? After the war, this was in 46-47, there was terrible hunger. Mom was left with us too. Our older sister was already married then, and my brother was very small, and I was even smaller. And our kolkhoz planted wheat, but we never saw this wheat. We were given a small ration of flour, and everything else went to the country, the post-war country. And every gram of bread was counted and sent to the centers. When they harvested wheat, there weren't any combines then. The wheat was harvested by hand. And he says, Mom sewed us little cloth bags like this. We would wear them like this. And when it got dark, when no one was around, we would quietly go to the field with my brother. When they harvested wheat, grain would fall, and this grain remained on the ground. And my brother and I would collect this grain kernel by kernel. We even tried to collect more in bad weather because at least it was food. One time he says it was very cloudy, very cold, it started raining. And my brother and I walked a long distance to this wheat field. And we started crawling and collecting this grain. And suddenly, he says, we hear the sound of galloping hooves. And we saw the kolkhoz chairman racing toward us at full speed. He was galloping so fast, rode up to us. I was very little, he says, and my brother was older. And he took me, he says, and had just started to move me away. This kolkhoz chairman rushed over and started cursing. You marauders, you're stealing from Soviet state. I'll show you. Hand over your tiny bags right now. I remember my brother took the tiny bag off me, gave it to him, handed over his own tiny bag too. And there was just a little bit collected in there, he says, because it was very hard to gather these tiny grains one by one. Well, imagine, these wheat grains. He says he took those tiny bags, opened them right in front of us, and scattered them like a fan across the field. And I'll teach you to love Soviet power. I'll teach you not to deceive, pulling out his nagaika. And you should know, back then these nagaikas, these nauts, as my father tells me, had a large wooden handle, and the whip itself was braided from leather, raw, natural leather. And he says he started hitting with full force. My brother ran to me, my older brother, he says, ran to me, fell on top of me, covered me, and took all the hits himself. And I, he says, only heard how he tensed up with each strike, not screaming, just tensing with each hit. And this pain, I could feel it right through him. Could really feel this pain. He says, I don't know how long it lasted. I don't know how it was. Dad says, I don't remember how it all ended. I remember that my brother's clothes, his fufaika, it was torn by these strikes, by these whips. I don't remember how we got home, but my brother lay there with his lacerated back, with these injuries for a very long time. Mother cried, mother treated him. And he says these scars from that whip stayed with my brother to this day. They remain for life. When he told me this, to say I was somehow shocked, no, that's not the word, because I saw my father's eyes when he was telling this. And he says, back then every tiny grain was salvation. I tell him, Dad, but he took it, he spilled it all out, most likely it all went to waste. He says, yes, it all rotted, the next day snow fell, it all got covered with snow, but back in Soviet times, it was considered that what you take from the field, what you took for your survival, that didn't matter. You were a marauder, an enemy, you stole from the Soviet Union. We arrived, grandmother met us, everything was wonderful. My father's brother had a son, he was my age, we were very close friends. And father went to a kind of utility shed, called us, and my cousin and I ran there. And there in the corner stood something covered with a jute sack. When he removed it, I saw two large stones like this. And Dad said, this is that same Zhernov. That's what it was called. This Zhernov is that very salvation, the reason we collected wheat. And why I'm telling you this, Dad brought this Zhernov to grandmother's room. She spread out a white cloth like this. They placed this Zhernov. Dad brought wheat. And he says, now I'll treat you to that very same food. The food we had after the war. The reason we collected these grains, the most desired, the most delicious. And he took a frying pan, roasted these grains in the pan, brought them to grandmother's room and says, when we were very hungry, mother would roast these grains for us and put them in our pockets so we could eat them slowly, these roasted grains. But the greatest, most delicious dessert was when you would take these grains and pour them into this Zhernov. He poured them into the Zhernov, and together with my cousin, it was very heavy, very difficult to turn. We both started turning this Zhernov. He poured in the grains, and along the sides, onto this white cloth, began to pour out the ground flour. For us, it was entertainment. Grandmother sat watching us. I don't know what she was thinking then. But we didn't even really think about it. And when we finished grinding this portion, grandmother took hot water, boiling water, and back then there was this lump sugar, this real lump sugar that was impossible to bite through. It was sold in the Soviet Union for a long time. It was the cheapest sugar, but it was the most natural sugar. And she poured boiling water over it, waited until it dissolved there, until it became like a sugar syrup, then gathered what we had ground, this small, tiny handful of flour, poured in the sugar syrup and made dough from it. And then very, very thinly, with her small hands, made such tiny, like pancakes, small oladushki, and laid them out on a towel. She said we needed to wait until they dried a little, and then it would become the most delicious, most wonderful dessert. These little cookies made from roasted wheat ground on the zhernov. We almost waited until they dried, but it was very delicious. I understand that nobody will make it now. I understand it's not at all the food we eat now. But then, it turns out, specifically in the post-war time, this was the most desired, most delicious dessert that was made for children on holidays. This is the story that happened in my family, and when I remember it, I still can't wrap my head around it. Why? Why, knowing that children were starving? Why, knowing that a woman was raising her children alone? Why, knowing that it would all go to waste anyway? It would rot, this wheat, these grains, it would all go back into the earth. Still, they had to show their power and prove that Soviet rule must prevail in any case. Regardless of circumstances, you must obey the laws of the Soviet state. You know, by irony of fate, this sovkhoz became very large, a very large enterprise. They grew wheat there. There was a very large cattle farm. It became a very big and wealthy sovkhoz. And my uncle became the chairman of this sovkhoz, in the same place where his predecessor had once lacerated his back when he was still a child. That's how life turns out sometimes. What could be better on a winter day, when it's cold and frosty outside, than hot tea and a very sweet and delicious vatrushka? Well, let's try it. The vatrushka turned out exactly the height I like. Shall we taste it? Why do I like this particular height of dessert? Because when you take it with your fork, you get all the layers together. And that's exactly what makes it most delicious. This is very tasty. You can add different ingredients. This treat has one big advantage. If you love fruits, you can add pieces of fruit to it. You can add dried fruits, candied fruits, nuts, chocolate after all, and you'll always have a different taste. Believe me, as my husband says, this dessert has one major flaw. It's impossible to stop eating it. All the ingredients are so simple, all ingredients are very accessible. And I don't know a single person who hasn't succeeded in making this dessert. So go ahead and make it, and I think it will become your favorite.